Welcome and good evening to Maryville Cares. Maryville Cares is a show that shares a wide variety of information for families and children in our community about resources that are out there to help us be stronger and thrive. And today I have a very special guest, John Falsetti. Hi, welcome, John.
Hi, Amy, thank you.
And John is here as our expert at Maryville regarding as our Chief Information Officer. John brings a wealth of information to us today. And, you know, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is in terms of helping keep our information safe and what that all means, because Chief Information Officer really encompasses many different responsibilities. But when it comes to how that affects our organization and our children, can you talk us through that a little bit?
Sure, Amy. So I've been here about 12 years. I've been from a technology perspective, I've been in social service for about 22 years. So I kind of got to know the business that Amy's in. So from a technical standpoint, obviously we have to do all the kind of like the boilerplate stuff. How are your email and your connectivity and all that kind of stuff, and data systems to run the operations. But there's a different part of it when you have clients, kids mostly, that are living with you. I'm using that in a broad sense, either part-time or full-time with us. And it's how to keep them safe and how to keep their information safe. It's really important, not unlike a hospital, but we're obviously a lot smaller. So we put a lot of time into that, and part of it, compared to 22 years ago when I started, is how the social media is really, really a big part of, it's a great tool, but it's also a big part on information and how we get it out there, and, not being able to control it on an individual level. And that pertains to the kids that live with us and also all the parents of the kids out there. So.
Yeah, and I felt it was especially important to, really hone in on this issue for media and children when it comes to parents, raising children. And, really, we see this when we're at the grocery store or somebody, a child with a phone or a tablet. Or you might see a car, back in the day they had the VCRs in the back of the car so kids could watch videos. And then we have our tablets and our computers. And I think it's especially critical at this time as we think about the safety of children and what is being seen and heard by them. And then how do we help negotiate that in a safe, loving way with our children, because we know how amazingly useful. I mean, let's face it,
Sure.
It's a window to the world, if you will, but how do we do that in a way that really captures the essence of a family capturing their own values when there's just so many things that kids can sort of get connected to? And any thoughts on that you want to share?
Sure. It's kind of from a non-technology perspective in this, but just from using the technology, I see some of the ramifications of this thing called social media, right? There's all kinds of other avenues from Twitter and even just texting, right, between kids and things of that sort. Obviously, just the web itself, being able to search for information. And, there's a few factors here, right? How much time does it take? And how much time does it actually take away from your day? And this, what you brought up earlier today about the family media plan, is kind of important. It's something that when my kids were younger, I wish I would have had one of those in place, because it was sort of new, this internet thing. And but now that it's sort of matured, for lack of better words, and we see some of the ramifications of too much time in front of your screen. It's good to have what they call a family media plan in place. It's more like something you put on a refrigerator, right?
Yeah.
It's like, here's certain times that we're going to have our devices out and how much time you're going to have them, and obviously it's just part of parenting on being able to, for lack of better words, enforcing those kind of things. But it's really important because we know how gaming is addictive for young folks, right? Especially males. How cyberbullying is a problem, and if you're constantly on your phone, and that's something that's, really needs to be open and frank conversations within the family. Now we're talking about just the negative aspects of things there, but it's also so positive what Amy was talking about before, the richness of information that's available to all of us, and really how to hone that down in a way that we're getting information we need and not just that kind of mindless stuff that happens.
Well, and it's a good point, because I know that, when we consider, how much we relied on it during the pandemic and how we're still negotiating how to integrate a balance. We're still struggling a little bit with that. And I think how we keep having these conversations ongoing in terms of, organizations, in terms of, families, in terms of how we decide what's important for us to sort of take in and when do we take it in. I think you bring up a really good point about just in terms of our priorities and, any time that we're raising a child, we have to figure out some type of framework about how we want, our family to kind of typically run, and you kind of want a flow of things. And so when you think about, dinner time or bedtime, some really key times, homework time, there's some general rules that sort of guide the kids, your expectations for them. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics is really sort of a really nice resource. In fact, they have a website called healthychildren.org. And that healthychildren.org website, it gives you a breadth of information on all kinds of issues related to raising children from a healthy, physical point of view, but also from a cognitive, social, and emotional, and specifically this idea of social media and the usage. And they have templates that you can use as a family. And we wanted to show you one that we're going to put up on the screen in a minute to talk with you and talk through it, just to give you some ideas about what you could put. So, as John said, this is a beautiful idea about putting it on the TV, on the refrigerator or somewhere where it's posted. So, for example, John, maybe you can walk us through this.
Sure. All right. So, obviously, this is just a sample, and this is something the family's got to talk about and what some reasonable frameworks around the use of social media. But here's something that's, we have mobile devices and TV not allowed, following areas in our house, bedroom, kitchen, dining area. Will not use mobile devices or other screens in the following times. So in other words, setting times, right, when it's just the screens just aren't there. It all makes sense, but if you kind of talk as a family and you put these kind of rules down in a way, rules is maybe a harsh word. It's more just an agreement. That's what's healthy for the family and what isn't, and the time frames around it. These items are so ubiquitous that, there's so many different ways to have connectivity, even on your watches, on your your cell phones, all the little, your TV now is a browser. It just doesn't end, let alone just the traditional stuff like iPads and PCs and things of that sort. So putting this framework around how you're going to interact with the internet within your family is really a healthy conversation to have. And it does, right now we know that, kids are staying up way past their bedtime because of it and things of that sort. And then with it all, it's a double-edged sword, right? You have great information on the internet, and you have all that stuff that's almost meaningless. And that's just the browsing through Facebook stuff.
Yeah, and if we can put that family plan up on the screen, one thing that I thought was really important to note for parents to consider is around bedtime. That what are the expectations of where these devices will be, so that you can integrate that into sort of your plan. And the other thing that's noted on that family plan is putting in there about recreation time, meaning, well, maybe you're all going to play a game together on the computer. I remember during the pandemic, when my children and I were all separated from each other, we were able to play a game on the phone through the TV to stay connected. And I got to tell you, we were laughing and we had a heck of a time, and it was just really special. We haven't done it since then, but I really felt like I was connected to my children. And so video games and other things can be a place of learning and growing. So what does that look like? You can watch educational shows together, use video calls. We want to be mindful that the media doesn't become a babysitter. I know that's difficult to say. Anybody who's raising children trying to make dinner or trying to have a very important phone call, we know that it's a blessing to perhaps have the TV or a tablet. But I think what we can do or think about is intentionally, what are they able to see and what are they able to interact with? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's just different nowadays, right? So before, they were limited to the DVDs or VHSs that you had in your library at home, right? They were limited to what's on TV. And now it's almost limitless of their access. And so what we're talking about today is not only trying to put some framework around what's a healthy way to engage social media, but also, which we didn't have to deal with before, is the invasive part of it, right? Being able to know what type of interactions your children are having with social media. And from a technician's point of view, we have filters and things out there for that. There's a million ways around. These kids are smart. So if you're worried about who your child is interacting with and things of that sort, it's best really to start having those conversations up front. Because even, let's say with your local internet company, let's say Comcast or whatever, they have filters that you could put on it. But there's so many ways around it, right? If they have a cell phone, they could just turn their cell phone into a hotspot. If they're at a public place with a public Wi-Fi, they could be engaging without any of our control whatsoever as parents. So those conversations are needed to be had up front, and probably the more we have those conversations, the more the freer that conversation is, and you could find out what are they doing with social media. And another thing that I'd like to talk about, could we move on to phishing attacks
absolutely.
And things of that
This is
sort?
important.
This is something that we've all heard the term phishing attacks, and that's an outside entity coming in through a link or asking some questions and things of that sort that seem really benign, right? But it allows them to get into your computer and start recording what you do and things of that sort and getting your personal information. And once they're inside your house, on your computer, even if it's a benign thing with, let's say, one of your kids, those are the kinds of things that could really get us in trouble as far as bank account numbers, things of that sort. If you're logging onto your bank and transferring some money, they could record all that stuff. So phishing education, for lack of better words, is really, really important, not just in business, but at the family level. With the amount, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it's quite a few. We've all read the stories about it where people lost quite a bit of money, right? They drained their savings or their checking account, things of that sort. We have a short video here. It's just basically introducing what phishing is and what it means, what the ramifications of not being aware of it could be. And excuse me, this is just one video, but if you Google on the internet, there's there's plenty of companies that'll charge you service, but there's a lot of free, if you want to say free information that's very, very good. So if we want to run that video.
Yeah, this is wonderful, John.
Phishing is when scammers fool you into thinking they are someone else in order to make you do something. For example, they can steal your password by tricking you to log into a fake website that looks exactly like your bank. Phishing emails are most common, but it's everywhere: phone, text, and even social media. Scammers can purchase ads, register to dating sites, and even use celebrity lookalike accounts. So if you get an urgent email from your boss, a text message from your bank, or see an amazing deal on Facebook, take a moment, let the emotions settle down, and read it out loud. Does it make sense? And always verify that you are talking to the correct person. For example, someone can spoof your attorney's email and send you fake wiring information, so call and verify. Lastly, always check the email address and URL for spelling mistakes. And whenever you need to log in, it's better to manually type in the URL instead of clicking on a link. Now, if you do spot a phishing email, never forward it to your friends. You don't want to spread it even more. Instead, share only the subject line with your IT team. They will be able to locate it. Meanwhile, just leave it alone until they tell you what to do with it. If your IT team has a different policy, follow it.
So, you know, it's pretty powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that was just a little graphic representation of the chances you're taking, and try to avoid them. And I definitely encourage everyone to Google phishing attacks and how to fend off from them, because it's really important.
Well, and I'm just thinking that you've been really promoting this within the organization, mm-hmm. particularly because we have such sensitive information. But what I just think about as a parent, and if it's a shared computer or if it's not, I think, you know, one of the things that we talk a little bit about as adults when we're around kids, and, you know, we want them to feel like they have a sense of agency and they're making decisions on their own. But it's okay to be a little nosy, I think, you know. And maybe nosy's not the word. I really think it's about being curious, about saying, hey, you know, I noticed this, and then, you know, can you tell me more about what you were playing, or what is this about? Or in terms of phishing, you know, talking to them once you get some more information, and John has certainly shared some tips when you're noticing something that isn't right. You know, our kids, you know, everything is coming at them so quickly, and they can click so fast. In fact, I was just talking to a mom the other day who did not realize, her daughter is 7, and did not realize that she was charging all these games, which were just like a $2.99 game, but it led to being like $14.99. And then this very innocent games, by the way, but she just didn't realize where this was coming from, because her daughter was just very innocently trying to find some educational games, but there was a price to it. And, you know, I don't know how it all happened that they got her account, or her, you know, it was connected somehow. You don't know it's all connected. And so the value of our education when it comes to our technology in our home is just so critical. Because, you know, John, I think about when we go home, we really think of it as our safe place, right? It's the place that we feel like we have control over. We're making sure that who's coming in, who's coming out, are the doors and the windows locked, you know, do we have a safe sleeping area, all kind of the basic living. And then now our world has been turned upside down by something as small as our phones really entering some really not so good places for our children, and how we need to really add that to our bucket of things to do as a parent, to recognize we have to pay attention to these things. And it's tough. It's just yet another thing, and it can become quite overwhelming. And, one of the things that I would, recommend is parents of all, children of all ages, talk to other parents. The schools are having information on this topic. Go to a local seminar if you hear more. There's some very dangerous things going out there that we kind of need to be aware of, that is so ever changing, right? And so, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, just to your point, it's changed so much, where we have so much at our fingertips and all these other devices in the house. So, we've got a few realms, right? Security of the home, right? We have security of information, and then we have what kind of information is influencing our kids. And there's a bunch of other topics. So those are kind of the main three. And we talked about kind of understanding the information our kids are downloading and who they're speaking with, and that's a conversation. More than, there's tools in place to be able to look at kind of what your kids are doing, but like I said, they could get around that, and they do. All right, so that's a big deal with the conversation. And now just this automation of these homes is a great thing, right? You could check what what your temperature is in your house, right? If you're away,
Sure.
and make sure that the furnace is still working. And you could also unlock your front door with Alexa. And this is a case in point with that. People thought that was really cool, and bad guys were going door to door and just screaming through the door, "Alexa, open the front door."
Wow.
And they would hit it every now and then. So these are the kind of things we have to think about when all this stuff is in place, and to balance this luxury through this automation or technology, and really what are the what ifs with using it. And, to keep our family safe, to keep our information safe, to keep our kids from predators and things of that sort. It's just the predator stuff, though, is still, I can't emphasize enough. That is reading up on it and speaking with your kids. Just like in the old days when they're talking about, not talking to strangers and
Yes,
things of that
yes,
sort.
yes.
The same rules apply. It's just now they're just harder to filter through, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because there is so much to try and navigate through this. And as you said, stranger danger, and that concept is still with the computer, in terms of kids, having friends on certain games, and being able to give private information or photographs. These are all things that can be scary, but it can be a beautiful thing too. And so, our talk today was really just as a reminder to don't be shy about reaching out to, your support system, or, quite honestly, if you're not that familiar and you have a trusting other adult or a trusting other older adult that's really good with this, go to them and say, "Hey, can you check this out for me? Does this seem okay for this child?" I'm unfamiliar, and I was sort of curious what my niece and nephew were looking at recently, and so I needed to ask them for some help with some of that. So I think our sensitivity to this issue has been really heightened. And as I want to just remind everybody about the resource of healthychildren.org, which is through the American Academy of Pediatrics. There's lots of other resources, but they really have some neat, simple things for different ages, literally from babies up until the age of 18. And what really realistic is how much screen time is really appropriate, because quite honestly, this is affecting their brains. This is the most critical time for children and the development of their neurons, for them to be able to thrive and learn with many other subjects. And so we want you to know that that's a resource. And, you know, John, any last comment at this time?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, it's just a common sense thing. This information age has moved so fast, so you got to read up on it. But I would say, just in general, think before you put a device in your house that has internet connectivity, and really, what's it doing for you? And what problem are you trying to solve with it? Because I'm going to be honest with you, less is probably better than more, and that's coming from a technologist's point of view. You don't need every single room to be connected somehow, where you could interact with it.
Yeah, and just, you know, that's a great advice to sort of put this to a close, and I would love to have further conversations, John, with you and your team on this subject. And again, we just really appreciate your time with us today for Maryville Cares. We're celebrating our 140th anniversary. It's a special time for our organization, and we will be highlighting our history in a show in 2024. So look out for that. But in the meantime, have a good evening, and we'll see you again next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you.